An ICE agent has been arrested in connection with the shooting of a Venezuelan man during a U.S. immigration raid. The case puts a sharp legal spotlight on how enforcement operations are planned, how force is documented, and what accountability follows when a raid turns violent. For viewers, the important point is the shift from allegation to criminal process. Investigators and prosecutors now have to lay out what happened, who gave orders, and whether the shooting met legal standards. The broader stakes reach beyond one officer. Immigration raids already sit at the center of a national fight over public safety, civil rights, and federal authority. This arrest means the next filings, court appearances, and agency statements will matter more than political reaction. Watch for the precise charges, any body camera or witness evidence, and whether DHS changes procedures as the case moves forward. The legal record will also show whether supervisors treated the incident as a failure of judgment, training, or policy. That distinction matters because it determines whether accountability stops with one arrest or forces broader changes in how immigration teams enter homes and handle confrontations. President Trump held a high-level White House meeting on Iran, with reporting focused on a possible deal tied to reopening the Strait of Hormuz and the future of uranium stockpiles. The strait is one of the world's most important energy choke points, so even the hint of disruption can move oil markets and raise pressure on allies. The key question is whether this is a negotiating track, a warning to Tehran, or a sign that military and diplomatic options are being weighed together. Any agreement would need to address shipping security, verification of nuclear steps, and the reaction of regional powers that could either calm or inflame the moment. For now, separate confirmed government actions from negotiating posture. The next things to watch are official statements from Washington and Tehran, inspection language, oil market reaction, and whether naval activity in the Gulf changes. Allies will also be looking for reassurance that shipping lanes stay open while any nuclear compromise is tested. If the White House frames the meeting as progress but regional actors see coercion, the risk is a deal that calms markets briefly while leaving escalation pressure intact. A Kenyan court has temporarily blocked a U.S.-backed plan for an Ebola quarantine facility, pausing a proposal that had raised questions about public health authority, local consent, and cross-border responsibility. A temporary court block does not decide the full case, but it changes the immediate timeline. Officials have to defend the legal basis for the facility before it can move ahead. The story matters because disease preparedness plans often depend on speed, yet they also require public trust and clear jurisdiction. If communities believe they are being asked to carry risk without transparency, even a medically justified plan can lose legitimacy. The next stage is procedural but important. Watch for the government's response to the order, any revised health safeguards, and whether the court asks for more evidence on who would be quarantined, under what conditions, and for how long. Public health experts will be watching whether the pause produces clearer protocols or simply delays planning. In outbreak response, trust is infrastructure. People are more likely to comply with quarantine rules when the government explains who is protected, who is restricted, and who is accountable. A judge has ordered President Trump's name removed from the Kennedy Center, adding another court ruling to the wider fight over politics, public institutions, and cultural control. The immediate effect is narrow. Signage, branding, or official references connected to the dispute may have to change. But the symbolism is larger because the Kennedy Center is a national arts institution, not a campaign venue, and courts are being asked to decide where political authority ends and institutional rules begin. For viewers, this is less about a nameplate than about governance. Who has power over a public cultural institution? What rules apply? And how quickly must an order be carried out? Watch for an appeal, compliance deadlines, and any response from Kennedy Center leadership. The next filings will show whether this becomes a short administrative fight or a broader constitutional argument. The ruling also lands at a moment when cultural institutions are being pulled into partisan identity fights. If the order stands, it reinforces the idea that public arts bodies can honor elected leaders only within established legal limits, not through improvised political branding. Virginia State Police say 5 people were killed after a bus crashed into cars on an interstate, turning a routine travel corridor into a mass casualty scene. The first priority is the human toll. Families are waiting for identifications. Survivors may face long recoveries, and investigators have to reconstruct seconds of roadway movement from wreckage, witness accounts, and vehicle data. Large bus crashes are especially complex because responsibility can involve the driver, the company, maintenance records, road conditions, and the behavior of other vehicles nearby. That is why early casualty figures are only the start of the story. The practical questions now are how the crash happened, whether speed or mechanical failure played a role, and whether safety rules were followed. Watch for the preliminary crash report, names of the victims, and any action from transportation regulators. Investigators may also examine driver logs, company safety history, and whether passengers were wearing restraints if the bus had them. Those details can turn a crash report into policy action, especially if the same risk appears elsewhere in commercial passenger travel. The Supreme Court's docket is drawing fresh attention as several major cases approach decisions or arguments that could reshape policy beyond Washington. A docket story can sound procedural, but the consequences are often direct. Court rulings can change election rules, criminal justice standards, business regulation, agency power, speech rights, and the limits of state authority. The important thing for viewers is timing. When the court takes up or decides a case, lower courts, agencies, companies, and state governments often have to adjust quickly. That makes the docket a roadmap for where national fights may move next. Watch not only the headline disputes but also the legal questions underneath them. How broad the ruling is, which justices join it, and whether the opinion leaves room for Congress or states to respond. The docket also shows how much national policy now turns on judicial interpretation rather than new legislation. That means a single phrase in an opinion can guide years of enforcement, lawsuits, and state-level experiments long after the immediate political argument fades. The United Nations has added Israeli and Russian forces to a list tied to conflict-related sexual violence, a serious designation that can shape diplomacy, sanctions pressure, and international scrutiny. The listing does not end the debate over specific incidents, but it signals that UN investigators believe the pattern is severe enough to require formal attention. For civilians in conflict zones, these findings are not abstract. They affect access to aid, accountability demands, and the credibility of military investigations. The governments named are likely to challenge or reject the conclusion, while human rights groups will press for documentation, survivor protection, and prosecutions where evidence supports charges. The next step is to watch the UN report details, reactions from Israel and Russia, and whether Security Council members push for concrete measures rather than statements alone. This designation also increases pressure on militaries to preserve records rather than deny allegations in broad terms. International accountability usually moves slowly, but listings like this can shape arms debates, aid conditions, and the diplomatic cost of ignoring survivor testimony. Kenyan authorities have arrested 8 students after a school dormitory fire killed 16 people, moving a devastating tragedy into a criminal investigation. The arrests suggest police believe the fire may involve more than an accident, but the public record still has to show what each student is accused of doing and what evidence supports the case. The loss of young lives makes this especially sensitive. Families need answers, schools need safety reviews, and officials must avoid rushing to blame before the facts are tested. Dormitory fires often expose failures in supervision, exits, alarms, overcrowding, or emergency response, even when a criminal act is suspected. Watch for formal charges, the fire investigation findings, and whether Kenya's education authorities announce wider inspections. The central question is both accountability and prevention. How did this happen, and what changes before students return to similar dorms? Parents and teachers will also want to know whether the dorm had functioning exits, night supervision, and a practiced evacuation plan. Criminal charges may answer who started the fire, but safety reviews answer why the fire became so deadly so quickly. Israeli forces have crossed a key river in Lebanon as part of an expanded ground offensive, marking a potentially significant widening of military operations near a fragile border. River crossings matter because they can signal a move from raids or limited positions toward a deeper tactical push. That raises immediate questions about civilian displacement, the response from armed groups in Lebanon, and whether outside powers try to contain the fighting before it spreads further. The broader regional risk is escalation by steps. Each new position, strike, or retaliation can make the next one more likely. For viewers, the essential thing is to track confirmed battlefield movement rather than rumors. Watch for statements from the Israeli military, Lebanese authorities, UN peacekeepers, and any evidence of new rocket fire or evacuation orders. Humanitarian agencies will also be watching access routes, hospitals, and shelters near the fighting. If the crossing leads to a sustained occupation of new positions, the conflict could move from a border exchange into a wider campaign with far harder exit terms.